All right, let's get this going. All right, good afternoon. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Regional Planning Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, January 24th, 2024, and it is about 2:20, my Lord. First on the agenda is a roll call to determine quorum. Maria?
Miss Alding,
Here.
Miss Dis,
Here.
Miss Gustafson,
Here.
Mr. Honigman,
Here.
Miss Loomer,
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Now I will go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for January 24th, 2024. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address the committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as informational only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment at the period at the end of the meeting. For items agendized for action or possible action, we'll hear public comment before the board takes any action. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find a hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I'd also like to ask that the remote members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment, and you'll be called to the front to speak. To ensure everyone has time to make their desired comment, you can agree with the previous commenter rather than making comments that repeat what others have said. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. If committee members need to ask clarifying questions during presentations, please do so, but we'll save our deliberation until after the presentation is complete. All right, so next item is approval of the minutes. John, any changes?
Approval of the agenda, Mr. Chairman?
Agenda, sorry.
There are no changes. Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll deem the agenda approved as posted. Next, we are on to that approval of minutes. Agenda item number 2, we have a set of minutes from December 13th, 2023 on page 75. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change? I look to my right and linger. No? Okay. If not, let's have a motion to approve the minutes. Can I get a move to approve? Mr. Settlemeyer, great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? One abstention. Shelley was not here, so the motion passes. All right, and that brings us to agenda item number 4, discussion and possible recommendation on economic sustainability and housing amendments to Placer County's Tahoe Basin Area Plan. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 173 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person or be called on in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. We have received a lot of written comments on this already, so if you have written to us, we have read them. Just know that. So now I'll hand it off to Jacob to
Mr. Chair,
introduce us.
before we start this item, I just had a quick statement. So I think the board and staff and the public that have been listening into our meetings over the last many months have heard quite a bit of concern about my financial recording and reporting. And I tend to not want to disagree with the public or try to correct it on the record at as they enter those conversations. I think it's more important that we listen to the intent of their comments and respond to those issues. But I originally, when these comments started coming out, directed people to my FPPC form 700. which indicates all my reportable financial interest upon penalty of the law. And that can be civil and criminal. For those of you in Nevada, I don't know if it's that same standard, but for California, it is. And this is a form that I've had to fill out for many years because prior to being on this board or being elected to the Board of Supervisors, I served on state commissions and also in local government in which I had to do this. So not only does it report my personal financials, but I'm married and my husband has a business. And so it requires disclosure of his business clients as well. So I'm happy to do that. And it is part of what I've been doing for many, many years. Gosh, I want to say going back to 1998, there's been some level of reporting on this. Because he does own a small civil engineering firm and land surveying company and does primarily work with public agencies, but he does do work with private, and they are all listed there. And I think some of the members of the public have been raising that to us all. I just want to make sure that the public and the board know I constantly make sure I check with county counsel and TRPA legal counsel to make sure that I am very clear on when I should recuse, when I should leave the room, and when I can stay part of those discussions. It goes beyond the letter of the law to the spirit of the law. And I'm very aware of that. My own personal and spiritual beliefs hold myself to very high ethical standards. And I understand that for some who don't know me, they don't understand that. And so I just wanted to make the statement that I have heard your comments. I am happy to discuss this, and I am very clear that today I can participate in this discussion. This has no distinguishable from any personal financial gain for me or for my husband based on these area plan amendments. And I think it's important because it does reflect on all the rest of the board that I make sure you're clear and you feel free to ask me questions or any members of the public. I want to be fully transparent. Doesn't make me afraid to talk about this issue. I just don't find there's an appropriate time to do it. So I wanted to start out with that today and just put it on the record. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair Gustafson. I think I really appreciate the comment. There's a lot of misinformation put out there about that issue for you and about a lot of other board members that it's misinformation. It's just not true, and insinuating that people are making money from this gig, this volunteer job that we have, and it's difficult being a citizen who's also an elected and then a volunteer on public boards. And we appreciate all you're doing in the community and all those arrows that you're taking.
I'm not worried about that. Thank you. But
No,
I just really feel it's important
Yeah.
that the public doesn't hear me respond because I don't think
Yeah.
it's appropriate under public comment. But I
Yep.
wanted to start out today and just make that statement.
All
Thanks,
right,
Vince.
well, we didn't need to say it, but we appreciate you. And I think anyone who knows you knows that, yeah, you would not do anything unethical. All right, so thank you for that. Now we'll turn it over to Jacob, who will introduce this item.
Yeah, my name's Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA, and I'm the TRPA planner who reviewed this proposal. And so I'll be introducing these amendments to Placer County's, excuse me, Tahoe Basin Area Plan. So this includes both policy and implementing code changes aimed at adapting the Tahoe Basin Area Plan to achieve the housing and economic development goals that were initially envisioned in the plan when it was adopted in 2017. And this is building on years of study and monitoring of the outcomes of that plan to adaptively manage those outcomes. The amendments aim to provide a systemic approach to encourage desired investment in environmentally and economically beneficial redevelopment and in workforce housing. So county staff will provide a detailed summary of this amendment package, but I wanted to note that TRPA staff have reviewed the proposal, IEC, and all conformance documents, and we found them to be in compliance and conformance with the regional plan and will not result in significant effects to the environment. And so we ask that RPC discuss this item and consider a recommendation of approval to the governing board. And with that, I'll hand it off to Placer County staff.
Thank you, Jacob. There we go. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Crystal Jacobson. I am the acting director for the county's Community Development Resource Agency, and I've spent a lot of time in our Tahoe City office leading planning efforts there. And I am here today with Stacy Wydra and Emily Setzer, both out of our Tahoe City office and Tahoe locals, as well as Stephanie Holloway here sitting in the back here. She's with our county executive office in Tahoe City. So the item before you today, as Jacob noted, is a county initiated amendment package to our Tahoe Basin Area Plan. And it includes revisions that are aimed at promoting and encouraging environmentally beneficial economic sustainability in our town centers and the production of housing. They really are targeted at looking at ways to encourage really small scale, I would say, redevelopment in our town centers. We haven't seen a lot of that since the plan was adopted. And so that's really the purpose here. And then also just to encourage the production of workforce housing, because that is a dire need in the basin, but definitely in the North Tahoe region for Placer County. So next slide. So just for a little bit of background on the purpose, this amendment package was actually initiated in mid-2021 after a study that we did. Emily, I'll touch on this in a little bit, but we did an economic study to look at the why behind the lack of reinvestment and redevelopment in town centers. Again, the Tahoe Basin Area Plan was adopted in 2017 by your board, and with the hopes of seeing some redevelopment happen in our town centers. We have invested a lot of public dollars in the town centers for environmental improvements, streetscape improvements, and things like that. But we have not seen that same kind of reinvestment on private lots. And so we did a study to look at that and figure out what the why behind that. And as part of that study, there were some recommended actions. One of those actions that the county could take was to look at the regulatory framework that the Tahoe Basin Area Plan, we call it the TBAP, and see if there was some room for revisions or refinements to help envision or see that redevelopment that our board hoped to see, and frankly, to achieve the goals of the regional plan and the TBAP. So we initiated this again in 2021. We have had a lot of public outreach and included multiple public meetings, workshops, and hearings. I'm going to touch on that in a different slide here in a second. But there has been a lot of, I would say, robust outreach done on this. We have completed environmental analysis, as Jacob had noted. We have done an addendum, a CEQA addendum to the 2017 TBAP EIR EIS. That was for Placer County. Also prepared an errata that focuses on the cumulative impacts. So that is included in your package today. And then we also prepared the IEC for the TRPA approvals. We also, in addition, prepared what we're calling a TBAP implementation report. That's a part of your package. I think it's attachment K in your package today. That was in response to comments that we received as we were making our way through the Placer County approvals. Our planning commission, there were some comments that were presented to our planning commission about, what has the county been doing to implement the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. And so we did prepare a report that is provided to you today. That outlines all of the things that we have done to implement the Tahoe Basin Area Plan and really achieve regional goals. So you'll see that in your packet. And then I just wanted to point out, in October of last year, 2023, our board conducted a hearing to consider the amendment package. That was actually continued to allow time for us to review. We had a lot of comments, just like you did here today. And so our board wanted us to go back, look at those comments, and then we provided a written response to those comments that were then provided to our board on October 31st. So in addition to that implementation report, you will also see in your package a written response to some of sort of the key topics. We really sifted through those comments that our board received and outlined the key topics that came up and provided some written response. So that's also prepared for you today. So on October 31st, we met again with our board and they did adopt the amendment package. So that's where we are today. And we have, next slide, please. We also have made it through, we started with our what we call North Tahoe Regional Advisory Council. We had multiple meetings with them. They're a citizen advisory group in Placer County. We had public, as you can see on the slide here, a lot of public meetings, public workshops. But then again, this last fall, we were before our Planning Commission, our board, and then before the APC. So we are here today to request a recommendation to forward this approval to the governing board, the full governing board. So I just wanted to point out here on the slide that, again, this package initiated in 2021. The outreach strategy really started in 2022 after we had framed up what these amendments would look like. And so you'll see here, lots of meetings. We actually went first to our Planning Commission for a recommendation of approval back in late 2022, and they wanted us to do more work. So we went out and did more work. We went out and had additional outreach, did some additional analysis. So there's been a lot of effort put into this amendment package. So I just wanted to touch on that. So next slide. With that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily. She'll talk a little bit more about kind of the why behind the package, get into some of the policy changes, and then Stacy will finish off with the changes that are a part of what we call the implementing regulations, which is the zoning piece of the document. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Setzer, Principal Planner with Placer County. So we have built these amendments based off years of feedback with a lot of different stakeholders in our community. It has, as Crystal mentioned, this was built off of a economic analysis that really showed that we at Placer have a lot of processing barriers and ultra strict development standards, extra strict required site improvements and zoning restrictions, making it hard to build housing and get small businesses and any new businesses really open. We have seen our local business associations have talked to us about how they've watched potential business owners come into our communities and then walk away and build their business elsewhere because it was too hard to start up in our region. So we have worked really closely with our business associations, with TRPA staff, our Tahoe Living Working Housing Group, Mountain Housing Council, and our North Lake Tahoe Chamber and Association. And as well, we've built off of the economic Envision Tahoe Prosperity Playbook also. Next slide, please. So I'll give a summary of what these amendments do. They're really geared as far as businesses to help foster and facilitate new businesses in our town centers. A lot of this is really targeted at small kind of mom and pop startups where it's hard for even a small business owner to open up a restaurant. We've heard detailed stories about the processes that it takes to get a restaurant open. So not even big, large corporate businesses, but just small ones. So the goal of these amendments is that it will help small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups really get started in our town centers, which are Kings Beach and Tahoe City. It would also comply with some state law, which SB 946 requires us to legalize sidewalk vending. And we wanted to kind of add on to that and clarify some of our mobile food truck requirements. We have seen some, particularly food restaurants, start out as a food truck and then move into brick and mortar. So we're trying to help foster that as well because it's a less expensive way to start as they grow their business. We're trying to help streamline some new small scale hotels and restaurants and retail, really those local serving land uses. We haven't seen a new hotel built in our region since the 60s, and we have had recent interest from some developers, larger and smaller. So we're hoping these can really help the smaller ones. It also enhances compatibility between the mixed-use commercial zone districts and the adjacent residential zone districts. So we're trying to recognize that our town centers back up to residential zone districts, and we want to make sure it all is compatible land uses. And we're also trying to increase creative solutions to help address our parking needs, our transit needs, figure out how people can park once and get around in our town centers. On the workforce housing side, in most of our zone districts right now, you need a use permit to build even a duplex. So we are trying to facilitate workforce housing by streamlining that deed restricted workforce housing. If it's deed restricted for affordable to achievable, it would be allowed without a use permit in some zone districts. We're also trying to limit new single-family housing in the town centers if it's not deed restricted for workforce housing. We've heard that strongly from our communities that they don't want our town centers dominated by new condos. And we're trying to clarify requirements for tiny homes. There's been a strong interest just alongside ADUs to allow and better clarify our requirements for tiny homes. Next slide, please. These amendments have had a lot of community conversation about what they do and don't do. These do not increase the number of units allowed per acre. They do not increase building height. Our current Tahoe Basin Area Plan limits building height in our town centers to 56 feet, and that is the same in these amendments. It does not touch building height. These amendments do not increase carrying capacity or build out of our region, and that is because we are still relying on the development rights system through TRPA. They do, however, target more development towards the town centers, which is the goal of the TRPA regional plan. They do increase overall development. They do not increase overall development because of the growth control system, and therefore they don't result in uses or activities that would increase wildfire risk. They also do not conflict with TRPA's scenic or environmental thresholds, and that includes traffic and VMT. They do not create a change of circumstances requiring additional California Environmental Quality Act supplemental analysis. And they are not connected to any specific project and do not result in piecemealing under a California Environmental Quality Act. I will say at one point, there were additional proposed amendments related to height and building length increases in the town centers, and those were removed. So those no longer are in this package of amendments. Next slide, please. So if we do nothing and we don't move forward with these amendments, we could continue to see increased runoff into the lake, more short-term rentals in our neighborhoods because we don't have the commercial lodging to serve our tourism industry. We could see more congestion because more local workers are commuting into Lake Tahoe. Pretty much every month I hear about somebody else who's moved to Reno or down the hill, and they used to be local. And we could continue to see an increased lack of vibrancy or walkability in our town centers. I know our business association had talked about a lot of vacancies in the commercial core of Kings Beach. Just this year, we've started to see a lot more vacancies in our commercial core of Tahoe City as well. Next, please. I will talk about the policy amendments and then I'll hand it over to Stacy for the implementing regulations. So in our policy document, we have proposed amendments to work with TRPA to preserve the scenic resource thresholds established by TRPA, really trying to increase conversations to target that development into the town centers. We have added a lot of vegetation management policies related to hardening and wildfire risk. We have added socioeconomic policies, a lot of times related to supporting things like new childcare, which has been a problem in our region, not having enough, and supporting new businesses and retention of new businesses in our area, in addition to recruiting new businesses. We've added amendments to the policy document on land use and mixed use, really trying to foster more mixed use that is bringing together housing along with other commercial uses, allowing people to live closer to where they work. We have added amendments to our policy document on the town centers and community design. A lot of it focused on art and preserving the uses that are really walkable and active storefront, vibrant storefront on the ground floor for town centers. For example, trying to move some of our utilities or real estate offices to not be on the ground floor in our town centers. They focus on redevelopment and housing, trying to target the properties that already have development, but that is old or not currently in use and could really use a revitalization. And really trying to foster policies to support workforce housing. How can we add these policies to our document so that when a future project or idea comes forward, these policies will be there to support future land uses, future programs, future ideas. A lot of these policies came directly from the community and community input. And we're not there before, and we really believe present kind of a holistic look at what the new version of Lake Tahoe in North Tahoe could be. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it over to Stacy.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon. I'm Stacy Wydra, Placer County. And like mentioned previously in our presentation, I'm going to discuss the amendments to the implementing regulations. And basically the implementing regulations is the part of the TBAP, or the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. It's the part of the document that serves as like the zoning ordinance for the basin area. And really a guiding document for development. So development standards, development guidelines relative to, excuse me, someone developing or occupying in our region. And so we looked first, I'll start in our town centers, and kind of what Emily touched on with our policies. You know, we're trying to link our policies to our implementing regulations so they make sense and that they're actually attainable. And so we looked at obviously some of the barriers that Emily also spoke of. And we recognized that through our town centers, we had a lot of small scale uses. So envision like an eating and drinking place that would need a zoning clearance to come into our town center. And so we looked at that and recognized that some of our land uses, while not changing the land use or proposed land use, we just looked at how could we encourage that use to come in. And so we're allowing them by right, if they screen out for VMT, you know, they still have to meet all environmental thresholds and such, but, you know, really trying to encourage that person to not have to go through a permit process for a use permit for a use that we want in our town centers. We also looked at, like Emily mentioned, food trucks and mobile vendors. We see that as a stepping stone. And then something we heard very, very loud from the public in all of our public outreach, at a lot of our meetings that we attended and presented at, that, you know, we have too many real estate offices and property management offices on our ground floors of our town centers. And so a way to, you know, we heard that concern. And so one of the examples of the amendments is to prohibit any new real estate or property management on the ground floor frontage, but that they could be considered on the sides, the rear, or second story. So again, trying to find the balance between the needs of the community and these types of businesses that also like to be in our town centers. And then we also looked at the housing pieces, again, trying to encourage more of that mixed use in our town centers. And I'm not going to go through all of these in its specifics because it's also contained in your packet as attachment H. So, and we're happy to go over any questions at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So then also in our town centers, we looked at our development standards and, you know, really hearing from the folks that we interviewed or discussed these items with, you know, they really expressed concerns that there's a lot of requirements and sometimes it's not clear or it's not consistent. And so we really went through the document and really tried to target development standards specifically for this slide, in our town centers relative to clarifying frontage improvements. When is it required? What is required? So really trying to help the reader also be able to navigate through this document and know exactly what would be required of them should they want to develop and or occupy a vacant spot. And then also we aligned with the shore zone requirements. We adopted our own shore zone plan. And so again, to really be in alignment with TRPA where we lacked. And And then one item I do want to stress, and I know Emily already mentioned this, but with the amendments proposed in front of you today, we are not proposing any changes to building height. The building height today is 56 feet in our town centers. It is to remain at that. The only section of the implementing regulations that we are proposing to modify is currently the code reads it's 56 feet or four stories. And that we heard from a lot of folks that that's really confusing. And so we are proposing to just eliminate the 4 stories. So just a 56 feet across the board to be, designed in accordance with the height standards of TRPA's Code of Ordinances. And then we looked at setbacks and really trying to facilitate where we can recognize, again, we had this, what we call the wedding cake, where the interior side setback was very confusing to the reader. And a developer not really knowing how to comply with this interior setback. So we are proposing to, again, modify those to assist in achieving the development that we need, but also assist the reader in them knowing what they need to do in order to develop. And then we also incorporated some amendments relative to groundwater and snow storage, really, again, to just align with TRPA. Where we didn't have any discussion or allowances for groundwater interception, let's say. Next slide, please. So other amendments, I'm moving now into many other zone districts that we have. We really looked at these zone districts and again to align with everything else that we are proposing. So for example, allowing mobile vendors in each of these zone districts where it wasn't otherwise allowed. Really aligning the housing with these zone districts. We looked at parking and really, again, trying to figure out where are our trends going. And so to align with the state trends and also existing conditions, what do we have to work with? And so also aligning with state trends was the tiny homes. So we added tiny homes. Also signage. We elected to eliminate our sign ordinance, which was grossly outdated, that we realized we were nowhere near alignment with TRPA sign ordinance, just because we have not been updating that along the years. But then again, also to make it easier for the reader, they know just to go to the Code of Ordinances. So we have the same sign ordinance. So it's a cohesive sign plan, if you will, throughout Placer County and the TRPA regulations. And then of course we had various revisions such as typos or, minor clarifications. Next slide, please. And then also with housing, we also looked at, and Emily touched on this a little bit, is, we really recognize the need for housing and where are we lacking? And so again, looking at what are the barriers for housing? And a lot of the barriers we saw was that there was a use permit required for the development of housing. And so we looked at that and we are proposing now that housing be allowed by right, provided that it's 100% deed restricted. So again, trying to get a little bit of both, the housing piece, but then also targeting who really needs the housing. And then also we looked at the development standards for housing and modernizing them. So for example, if a property owner owns 2 parcels adjacent to each other and, the thought of building a duplex might be the most efficient use of that site and its existing characteristics, we have introduced a setback of a 0 foot at the interior sideline. So that's shared by both so that they can build the duplex, but that the greater setback on the other side, so the opposite side, is 10 feet at least. So acknowledging that there's, different types of housing that needs to be encouraged out there. And so that's what we're hoping to do with these amendments. Next slide, please. So as Crystal mentioned, we did receive public comment, and the attachment M of your packet provides a summary of the county comments, or excuse me, county's responses by each topic. And Crystal kind of tapped into that. But here's the list. And like I said, we did provide a response. We're happy to answer any questions to any of these key topics at the end of our presentation. Next slide, please. So we are required by CEQA and TRPA's authority to prepare an environmental document. And for the CEQA side, we prepared an addendum and an errata to the 2017 Tahoe Basin Area Plan and the Tahoe City Lodge Project EIR-EIS. And as a result of that addendum and errata, we determined that the Board of Supervisors determined that there would be no environmental impacts associated with these proposed amendments relative to CEQA. Next slide, please. And then similarly, we conducted the necessary environmental review for TRPA, and we prepared an initial environmental checklist, an IEC. It was prepared in accordance with TRPA's requirements and the TRPA Code of Ordinances. We also prepared the required findings, which were prepared pursuant to chapters 3, 4, and 13 of the Code of Ordinances. Next slide, please. And the conclusion of those environmental documents was that there is no significant effect on the environment. These amendments are consistent with and would not adversely affect the implementation of the regional plan, including all applicable goals and policies, community plans, plenary statements, TRPA code, and other TRPA plan and programs. It also concluded that it would not cause environmental threshold carrying capacities to be exceeded. Again, we are not proposing any changes to density. And then they also do not affect or change the federal, state, or local air and water quality standards applicable to the area plan. And they also continue to achieve and maintain the thresholds of the regional plan, and that they are consistent with and then further the goals and policies of the regional plan. Next slide, I think that concludes. Yeah, so with that, we are recommending approval of the required findings as described in attachment D, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the Tahoe Basin Area Plan amendments presented before you today and also contained in the staff summary of your packet. And also, we are requesting recommendation of adoption of the ordinance prepared, amending ordinance 2021-02 to amend the Tahoe Basin Area Plan as shown in attachment C of your staff summary. So with that, that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, all of you. Great presentation. Any committee members have any questions or comments? Shelley?
I don't know who to direct this to, so speak up, whoever would like to respond. There's a mention here about, if I can find the reference, exempting multifamily housing of fewer than 15 units, I think, from design review. And it doesn't mention that these are affordable units. Why would that be done? I mean, a normal submission includes elevations, you know, in addition to site plans and so forth. I mean, why is it cost related? On the other hand, you don't want, there's an emphasis in your, this is incidentally very well done, but there's an emphasis on ensuring compatibility, and that would also apply to architectural style. So could you clarify that for me?
Thank you. Yes, we have found that, and we've heard a lot of feedback that the design review process can add a lot of cost and time to smaller housing projects. So staff had talked internally about how can we kind of help those smaller housing multifamily projects along. And we thought that this could be a good proposal to help speed them forward through the design review process. I think Stacy could provide some more anecdotal feedback on that actual design review process, but it has held up some projects, and those projects tend to be so small that the design review would maybe not be necessary. I will say if they are still on a corridor where design review is required of any project, they would absolutely still have to go through to the design review process. But if they're tucked back in a neighborhood and it's a duplex or it's a triplex, then it would not be subject to the design review process.
I'm thinking that, you know, on scenic corridors, obviously you would weigh in, but I'm concerned about adjacent property owners. You know, somebody builds an igloo, you know, and I mean, theoretically it could be anything, right? If there's no design review. I'm assuming in your code, you've got examples of acceptable architectural styles. So as long as they comply with those examples, then
Correct. They
it's a-
still have to comply with our development standards that are outlined in the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. It's similar to single-family homes. I mean, it still has to comply to the standards as well. And what we found is that a lot of the smaller multifamily projects could actually be a similar size to some of the larger single-family homes one has to go through it and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, I would just like to point out, so when those projects come forward, they are reviewed by staff and they're reviewed to the standard. And so there's an internal review that happens, but by our land use planners in Tahoe, they just wouldn't go through the public design review process. So they still are subject to those standards.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. May I continue?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, and I understand that some of this is beyond your control as it is controlled by legislative action, but you know, my experience with sidewalk vendors, I mean, they can be responsible, they can be irresponsible. They can be a stepping stone, as you've alluded to, for a vendor to, you know, kind of transition into a brick and mortar location. But they can also be a detriment to brick and mortar restaurants in particular, if they're allowed to you know, to sell their goods within a certain distance of a competitor. So does the rule, does SB 946 provide you with enough latitude to implement requirements that are going to protect your existing businesses? Because based on what you've said, you're losing businesses in certain areas of Placer County at the lake. And I'd hate to see that trend continue if there is unfettered competition from these mobile vendors.
Yeah, so we are mandated by the state, but there are parameters of which those mobile vendors have to abide by. But unfortunately, we don't have like a specific, you know, that you can't be in front of a competitor or something along those lines. But you know, we have seen some success with food trucks that have actually kind of designed themselves in like a little courtyard, if you will. And it's becoming quite successful. So we're just, you know, I think it's going to be evaluated as they come in, but they also have to get permits, you know, from the Department of Public Works if they're on a public sidewalk. So there are some, I guess I would say, I'm not sure what the checks and balances. Yeah. So that we would look at and then proceed that way. But it's really a state mandate that we're kind of under at this time.
Well, yeah, and there are oftentimes unforeseen consequences.
Yeah,
If you,
I would also like to point out, we do have a code enforcement team in our Tahoe office. And so we do respond to complaints we actually have complaints about these types of things and actively respond to those to make sure that they either have a permit with the Department of Public Works, like Stacy mentioned, or that they have a permit through our health department. They do have to do that as well. And so we do address those concerns that come up through our code compliance department.
are they required to pay sales tax? In other words, report their sales tax, their transactions?
Right, right.
Okay, because
Mhm.
I mean, you know, being in the real estate business, I mean, brick and mortar tenants pay a lot of overhead for the privilege of being in a brick and mortar location. And I can imagine that some of those folks are going to be resentful. You know, they're going to think that these vendors are not paying their own way. And obstructions of sidewalks. I mean, are you going to have to expand your sidewalks in certain areas to accommodate these vendors? Because you don't want people having to be forced into traffic in order to, if they're, you know, consuming the entire width of your sidewalk, people are going to have to step into the street in order to go around them. And I'm also assuming, I mean, some of these vendors can be pretty aggressive, but that would also fall under the code enforcement responsibilities to ensure that they're, you know, not harassing tourists in the process of vending their wares.
Right. Mhm.
Okay, okay. And then let's see. And I know, again, this is, I think, being compelled by the state. The use of parking lots, both public and private, for workforce camping. I mean, how do you keep that from transitioning into a homeless camp?
So that is not compelled by the state, actually,
No,
but it is happening right now. And right now we have no parameters, no requirements, very little enforcement. So we have heard a lot of feedback, particularly from the Mountain Housing Council of other mountain towns such as Telluride that have created formal programs in certain locations where you have to prove you're a local worker, you have to show where you're going to park. They designate where to put your waste and where to use the restroom and how long you can be parked there, and that you can't have excess, things coming off of your vehicle, such as that. And so they actually have created formal programs to address what is actually already happening on the ground. And it has been successful. It's similar to Palisades right now has been working with one of our campgrounds. So it's kind of a similar idea for local workers to have a safe place for them to park and live out of their vehicle. We could actually, it's a policy at this point, so it doesn't allow it. If these were to pass, a formal program would have to be developed. But there are examples in other jurisdictions that have been successful. I've seen it in other cities as well, to try to deal with what is already happening today, which is we have a lot of local workers who don't have housing and are living out of their cars. So it's just a policy at this point, but it would set the stage for if we wanted to provide a program down the line, we could then do so, and we could coordinate with all of the departments such as environmental health and public works and sheriff, and really create it so that there are there's a very formal structure.
And I think one of the important, this is Cindy Gustafson for the record, one of the important points there is developing that program, but understanding people are parking out in the woods. They are building fires, they are cooking, and on the land without a paved surface. And we've had fire dangers from these. Obviously health and safety needs and environmental impacts, because we have such a shortage of housing. So I think we as a county aren't ready to move forward on that quite yet. But I think we wanted to have that option, because going through this process of all these public meetings, we thought it was appropriate. And we heard that from a lot of our housing advocates, to be open to that in the future. And it may need to be possible that we find a place and develop a program, as long as they're local workers.
something like akin to a county-owned RV park.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other comments from committee members?
I did have a couple more. Obviously, I've been through this a bunch and sat through a lot of the public comment, both in public, in the MAC meetings and others. And it's still challenging, I think, for us to fully understand. And so, staff, I'm going to put you kind of in an awkward situation, but I spent several weekends just going through every one of these in detail, and I found that I didn't see the kinds of controversy that we have seen expressed and the concerns. There are a lot of cleanup language in here, which is confusing, right? People see lots of red lines, but it's usually coming into conformity with TRPA. And it was very, I think it was very important that the public was heard on the issues of height and density and massing, and that was all taken out. Am I correct? And I want to just keep putting that on the record.
That is correct. We did peel that out of this amendment package. However, for transparency, and I've said this at other meetings, that is an area that we might explore as a separate package. Are there areas in our town centers that, might be appropriate for some additional height? But as for this package, it has been taken out. Yes.
And I think that's important, because people have repeatedly comment that we're not hearing them. And I think we did hear them on the biggest issues that we had heard about. Some of the other issues are much more broad scale issues that you'll see the comments on that are more about the entire region on fire evacuation but it's not about what these particular amendments, how they're going to add to those issues, but the concerns are valid. I think the public's concerns are valid, but not on these particular amendments. And then I don't think you mentioned, but I think the committee is aware and the public's aware, we have been sued. The county has received a lawsuit on these amendments. And I think it's important to know that we're walking through that process, but making sure that you're aware of that as well. Or we've been served. So anything else that I've forgotten to ask you that you want to make sure gets put on the record before we go to public?
Yeah, no, I think you got him. That's great. Thanks.
Any other comments? Any online? Alex, I think is online. I don't see anyone or hear anyone. All right, so we'll go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. First, we'll go to people in the room. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak on this item? Seeing nobody, we'll go and check online. Catherine, do we have some
Thank you,
hands
Mr. Chair.
raised? I'm assuming.
So far, we have 3 hands raised. The first hand up was Adam Wilson. Adam, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you. For the record, Adam Wilson with the North Tahoe Community Alliance. My comments are just that these plans have been vetted, and I commend staff as they have listened and they have made adjustments along the way that may have not been perfect, depending on your point of view, but were very thoughtful and still meaningful. 2, our business community is looking for opportunities to revitalize our town centers, and these amendments not only comply with that and SB 946, but encourage new business opportunities. 3, we have a workforce housing issue, as you all know, and this is just one positive step in the right direction. This creates opportunity for smaller developers, which is what we are hearing is the preferred redevelopment in our town centers, specifically on the North Shore, with mixed-use projects that also help to serve the commercial needs. The outcome of these projects that create workforce housing will reduce VMTs. We've seen a reduction, especially in Kings Beach, in available hotel rooms over the past 20 years. And if we do nothing, why would any of that change? These amendments at least provide an opportunity to regain some of those lost rooms by providing an easier way to do small developments that encourage mixed use and motel and lodging. These amendments allow us to be more creative and innovative as we think about tiny homes, ADUs, etc., towards workforce housing solutions. And last but not least, I would strongly encourage the community, regardless of your positions or your beliefs, that we come together and we all work towards solutions and how we overcome these types of thoughtful changes and needs for our community. Again, Adam Wilson with the North Tahoe Community Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Next up.
Next hand raised is Steve Teixeira. Steve, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the governing board. Steve Teixeira. My company is Sustainable Community Advocates. I have attended many of the meetings, both at the county level, the North Tahoe Regional Advisory Council level, the Placer County Planning Commission level, and also with various levels at TRPA. And I'm happy to join with Adam Wilson in urging your support for these amendments. A lot of work has gone into them, as you know, and it's time to move forward. People are the ingredient that we need in our town centers. Both Tahoe City and Kings Beach are ghost towns compared to what they used to be. If you arrive through the area, you see a lot of boarded up buildings, don't see a lot of vitality. People are the vitality that we need, and these amendments are designed to help both in terms of vitality from lodging properties in the town centers and affordable workforce housing in the town centers. So again, I know this board is very familiar with these amendments and this committee, and we urge you to move this forward to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And
The
next.
last hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, committee members. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Our nonprofit is one of the 3 nonprofits involved in the writ of mandate against Placer County, which hopefully you took a look at our written comments, and the writ of mandate itself is in Exhibit 2 of the attachment. It speaks for itself. Attachments A through F, or excuse me, A through G are the same attachments that were provided to the Placer County Board of Supervisors. We've been consistent on our comments throughout that process, and we will remain consistent on our comments within this process as you guys work this up through your eventual, I guess, governing board process. So I need to just take exception. I'm so sorry if I have to say that, having been part of public service for many years of my life and addressed many city councils and many situations that require comments on environmental issues, I've never seen a process of which the public has been so misled, especially on the issue of wildfire evacuation. It's unconscionable that the Placer County Board Supervisor would say that this information has been significantly addressed. It is not. The Placer County EIR in question and the addendum to the EIR, the traffic counts are completely flawed. They're totally flawed, and this continues to be ignored. They're flawed to the point that the documentation Placer provides actually talks about the number of vehicles that will be able to exit the area in case of a wildfire. Consistently, we pointed out that that's flawed. For you guys to approve this today with that flawed information is tragic. To allow denser town centers choke points during wildfire evacuation based on flawed information is unconscionable. Which one of you are going to ask this question about those traffic counts and the number of vehicles that are being claimed to be able to move through not only the choke points, but the traffic calming traffic circles? It's hard for me to believe that you're going to do this, but obviously many of you will choose to ignore it and eventually could cause somebody significant injury or death. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Chair, 3 more hands went up. The next one is Aaron Casey. Aaron, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Casey, and I am the CEO for a new nonprofit organization called the Tahoe Housing Hub, where we are very focused on solutions to the housing crisis in our community. The first thing I want to do is just commend staff for the work that all of the presenters who are there today have done. I know that this is not an easy process. I also would add that I do agree, after reviewing all of this documentation myself, that it feels like perhaps some of the feedback you all have been receiving is about something much bigger than these amendments. I think that, we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I'm not sure that the feelings of fear and fire are necessary, and traffic and a variety of other things that come up in these meetings over tourism, et cetera. I think that those are much bigger issues, and it makes it hard to really see what staff has brought for you today. I did want to also mention, I guess I'd say we are in support of the Tahoe Basin Area Plan amendments, and particularly because we think that it will make a difference in terms of our ability to address our housing crisis in our region. And I did also want to note that these changes that staff's brought forward for you today are not unusual. They're happening across the state of California and across the West, so much so that the Turner Center for Housing Innovation out of UC Berkeley has a program where they reward cities and counties that boost their housing supply. And the primary criteria in order to receive a certain designation and funding include favorable zoning and land use policies, acceleration of housing production timeframes, including streamlining of approval processes, reduction of construction and development costs in terms of promoting innovative housing types, and also really trying to expedite the approval process for certain projects, and then providing financial subsidies. So I'm sharing that with you to demonstrate that a lot of the changes that are mentioned in this document are happening across the state of California. There is a lot of state legislation that has come out this year for certain qualifying housing projects that would exempt them from CEQA or would allow for an expedited CEQA process. So there is a strong desire in the state of California to support the development of workforce housing. The code amendments you have in front of you are consistent and aligned with a lot of what the state of California is doing, as well as other states and cities and counties in the West, in the Mountain West, to address this critical problem. And I want to thank staff and all of you for the opportunity to share my comments. And again, the Tahoe Housing Hub, we are in favor and support of these amendments. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Erin. Anyone else?
Next hand raise is Sophia Hydrick. Sophia, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Good afternoon, Regional Planning Committee members. My name is Sophia Hydrick, and I am the Advocacy Director for Mountain Area Preservation. I would like to focus today on the environmental review that was completed for this process and the new information and conditions that should have triggered additional environmental analysis. Last year, community members pointed out that new environmental analysis is needed for a variety of reasons. Among other things, we need to understand the full impacts of the amendments on wildfire risks, emergency evacuation, vehicle miles traveled, and water quality. In reviewing the addendum and the errata to the addendum this week again, I was struck by one of the findings from the 2017 EIR that said with mitigation, the impact of wildfires was less than significant. I just don't understand in what world, even with more mitigation in place, a finding could possibly be made that the impact of wildfires is less than significant. So now we're trying to concentrate more people in a small and very constrained geographic area where wildfire is a constant threat. Concentrating more folks in a smaller area, even for good reason, can further constrain evacuation routes. Say that the impact is significant and unavoidable. Say that the amendments outweigh the risks. Say that you're doing everything you can to mitigate the risk, but don't say that it's less than significant. The 2017 EIR included mitigation measures to require individual projects to implement traffic control plans, as well as emergency preparedness and evacuation plans. And those are not bad mitigation measures, but comprehensive wildfire planning has to consider the regional context. This isn't an impact that can be fully analyzed at the project level. And there is new information and data available today, particularly about climate change and wildfire behavior that was not known back in 2016 when the baseline conditions for this EIR were established. Northern California has experienced two massive, devastating fires, the Caldor and the Camp Fire, and we have to use the lessons learned from those experiences to inform long-range planning. If you look back at the news reports from the Caldor Fire, it's striking how many officials say things like, it didn't follow the plan. This is extreme wildfire behavior. Record-breaking forest fires are becoming the new norm, and we have to be thinking about planning in that context. We have to be preparing for situations that we didn't think were possible. And in addition to wildfire, we have new information about microplastics and mud snails in the lake. The TRPA has a new vehicle miles traveled threshold. The TBAP was not analyzed under that threshold. This would have been the perfect opportunity to come into compliance with that required analysis. And these are just a couple of examples of new information and lessons learned that weren't available in 2017 and should be considered under CEQA to understand the implications of these amendments. These topics were brought up last year. Placer County agreed to do additional environmental analysis, but what came out was no new analysis, no new data, no new information. Again, that's just not the environmental review that the community asked for. That's not what Placer County said that they would do. And even more than that, it's not what is required under CEQA. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Sophia. Anyone else, Catherine?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's one more hand raised, Melissa Soderson. If you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yes, Melissa Sotterston, Tahoe Forest Matter. I just had a specific question about the vegetation portion. I did see that mentioned in there. I'm not sure what exactly those regulations would be that you'd be changing. I would hope that they do not make it easier for people to log in the greater forest, which we know is not a great way to mitigate fire. It's not doing anything to keep our communities safer. It is harming our forest health, adding sediment to our lake. I know that there's much talk about biomass facilities in Placer County. I also hope that these vegetation amendments are not directed towards making it easier to bring in biomass facilities. Our forests are being decimated as we watch it happen under the guise of forest health. And yet we're seeing nothing done to provide us with safe evacuation routes, actual proper defensible space, actual buried utility lines, metal roofing, proper home hardening, infrastructure hardening, methods that we know will protect our communities during an extreme fire event. It's been proven, it's been collaborated by studies done by the Insurance Institute at the Missoula Fire Lab. There's a great documentary on it. It's called Elemental Reimagine Wildfire, not to be confused with the Disney version. I do suggest that all of you take a look at that video. It is directly relevant to everything that we face in these forests. It is coming from the mouth of CAL FIRE, USFS scientists, the very people that we are counting on to keep us safe are standing there and telling us that these logging projects, thinning is not working. So I just hope that as you look at these regulations, that you really take a strong look at how you're implementing fire-wise practices, evacuation routes, and that it doesn't involve just a blanket economic reason to allow logging into our forest, because that's what it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Chair, one more hand went up. Gavin, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello from the speakers later this afternoon. We've been providing comments on the Gavin Feiger on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. We've been providing comments on the TBAP amendments since fall of 2023 when they started. And we've had some concerns over the time that mirror a lot of the concerns of what you've been hearing from the North Shore. But really what we did not see that we were hoping to see was the need for the amendments. We still have not seen how they really benefit the environment or the community. We don't have a stake in economic development. That's not in our mission. So we asked for some specific things, and over the course of the last year and a half, Placer County did provide a little bit of information about implementation from the original TBAP in 2016. But really, I hate to get back to the governing board meeting with the vehicle miles traveled, but one of the things that we asked for over and over again was to at least look at this in some way, the TBAP amendments, even if not through a whole new CEQA document, of what it would look like under a new VMT threshold, and nothing. So it's just another example of the frustration and the lack of commitment that we've seen from TRPA and partners on achieving and maintaining the new VMT threshold since it was adopted in 2021. So that's it for my comments on this one. You can look at our past comments we've submitted to APC and the county for more specifics if you like. Thanks, and hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks, Gavin. Anyone else, Catherine?
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment.
All right, great. Then we'll close public comment. I'd like to ask the Placer staff. There were a couple themes, and things that came out in their fire safety, the environmental benefits, evacuation, all that. If you guys could comment on those things, because I'm sure you've been asked a lot before, and I imagine you have some answers to those. So.
Yeah, I think I'll start. The first one that I think came up a lot was the fire evacuation, wildfire. So I can touch on that. And that's actually, there's a lengthy response in the comments attachment, M, in your document there. So what I want to point out, and Emily touched on this in her part of the presentation, is that these amendments are not we are not proposing to change any of the units per acre, the requirements of units per acre, right? So in each zone district throughout the Placer County, basin area and throughout the basin in general, there is a requirement for how many units you can have per acre, whether it be lodging units or residential units. They're capped. There's a number like 15 dwelling units per acre, that type of thing. So that's a standard that is in our Tahoe Basin Area Plan, and there's a standard for each district. We are not proposing to change any of those standards. So the full number or build out, right, of if when we prepared the 2017 TBAP EIS, we looked at the full build out. We analyzed the maximum capacity. If you were to build out at that full amount of units per acre, what does that look like? And we analyze that in that document. We are not proposing any change. So when you're looking at wildfire risk, a lot of the comments that we have heard are about really population increase. The concern that, or the fear that these amendments are increasing population, but we are not proposing a change to those units per acre. And what that means is we're not proposing, population increases is a result of those units per acre, right? Increasing. And we're not proposing that. So getting back to the wildfire evacuation, again, that is, that's tied to the fear, and the comments that we hear are about we're increasing population and therefore, the risk for wildfire and evacuation is higher because you're going to have more folks here, right? But that's not the case here. And so that's what's outlined in that response. That's what's outlined in the addendum. So that's really, that is our response to, to that. I understand the fear. I mean, people, all of us, right, are afraid of what has happened in the West with fire. We do address it. There's in the response, there's a section here where, we have coordinated with our emergency management team to help, provide a response here in terms of what they would do in the event of an emergency. And there's a lot that goes into it. I know they study it, every fire that comes along, they look at and they study and they, they change their practices, right? They're always looking for the best management practices for wildfire risk. So that's the response to that item. I'm going to let Emily touch on, there was a question about the vegetation policy, so I'll let her touch on that. I did want to point out, the question about the need for the amendments. The need is really that we haven't seen any change. So, the goal of, I think, the regional plan and the goal of the 2017 TBAP was to try to focus redevelopment in the town centers because that is where, that's the built environment, right? So to kind of focus the redevelopment there. And what you get with that redevelopment are environmental benefits, right? So you're going to get those private properties that come into redevelopment are held to very high development standards that improve the environment, whether it's contribution into, payment into traffic impact fees, whether it's putting in water quality improvements on site. There's all kinds of things that developers are held to, these standards. And those standards then go straight into environmental improvements. So that the need is that we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that reinvestment on the private lots. We are seeing them on the county parcels because we've done a lot of improvements, right? And in terms of streetscape improvements, water quality improvements, all kinds of public dollars have been thrown into the county properties in the Placer County portion of the basin. But we're not seeing that same kind of reinvestment. So that's the why, that's the need. And it ties right back into the goals of the regional plan, right? And trying to improve lake clarity. So that I think answers that. If I may have missed some on that, but I'm going to toss it to Emily to answer the question on the vegetation policy.
Yes, we have included policies to support hardening of, say, commercial and residential uses in North Tahoe, policies to support green waste. Currently, North Tahoe does not have green waste bins. So policies to support individual green waste bins to try to increase defensible space on individual homeowners. And policies to support defensible space incentives and or rebate programs. None of our policies focused on forest land at all. They were purely focused on the built environment.
Great, thank you. And I imagine, we heard the comment about buildings. We can't force anyone to retrofit their existing home with the latest technology, but I imagine if someone replaces a roof or builds a new house, it's not going to be shake shingle. It's going to be something that's safety with the, best practices. I know the vents have to be safe, all those, there's a lot of requirements now. So but maybe if you can comment on that.
For sure, that is true. Most of our housing stock and most of our commercial stock is very dated, many decades old. The more updated we get any of those structures, the better they will be resistant to wildfire risk.
Thank you. All right, great. Thank you, guys. Great presentation. Thank you for answering the questions.
Thank you.
Cindy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Cindy Gustafson for the record. And I wanted to amplify that because I can't remember the title of the California Building Code that is the fire items. But we do know when buildings are built to that title, they do survive wildland fire. And I firsthand witnessed this at the river fire in Colfax. We saw every house around one particular new house burned to the ground and one survived. It was built to those standards. So we know that is important. And thank you for pointing that out. On the evacuation issue, I try, and maybe this is a question for John Marshall. We continue to hear this issue, and I'm not sure how any jurisdiction in the state prepares to address in an environmental document chances of earthquakes, flooding, these kind of catastrophic events that could occur. And I'm just not sure how we as an agency or as a region address that. But in these area plan amendments, I am confident that we're not increasing density. We're not dealing with that. And because I was at the most recent fire we had, the largest in Placer County's history was last year with the mosquito fire. And we had to evacuate Forest Hill and Todd Valley. Many thousands, I think it was over 8,000 people were evacuated. But the difference is that we phase it based on those most at threat, get out, and now we hold the other side streets. This is what the letter says, but I just want to paraphrase in a amateur way. And I watched while they did this, and it was methodical, it was orderly, and everybody was evacuated safely. We can't always guarantee the behavior of the fire, but we do know that we have time to phase which areas need to be evacuated, and we're not going to evacuate the entire basin at the same time. And that was one of the lessons learned from South Shore in the Caldor, that there were people at threat, but everybody was asked to go ahead and evacuate, and that's what crowded the roads. Everybody got out okay, but there were longer delays. And those, we're trying to help the public understand, if you get the warning, or if there's a wildfire nearby, go ahead and evacuate if you can. The sooner you go, the better, and the more opportunity the emergency firefighters and everybody has to get in and deal with those who can't evacuate as quickly. But I guess my question to staff at TRPA, we continue to hear this. Have you given any thought as to how we address this from an environmental viewpoint? Because it can't be on every single project we do.
I think I'll start and then maybe pass it on to other staff. So let's distinguish between two different kinds of consideration. One is just generally how are evacuation plans built, and will they work? And that's really kind of the bailiwick of the experts who do that kind of thing. What we're really talking about, and this is the TBAP amendments is a good example, is when we propose an action, we need to assess the effects of that action on a particular potential environmental impact. And one of those is, and these are questions in our checklist, is will this action have any adverse effect on evacuation plans or evacuation planning. And then what that really means is that you look at what the action is, not the bigger question of are our plans adequate, but whether or not there's an adverse impact associated with what is being proposed. And you've heard from the county that in their assessment, and we concur, there's nothing about this action that increases any risk. And that's the conclusion that the environmental documentation looks at for running through the analysis for these individual decisions that come before you. So it's not a general assessment of fire risk and evacuation safety in the basin. That you can ask for reports on that. We can get the experts here, and maybe I'll turn it over to John to talk about that. But that's a separate process than the kind of individual CEQA or TRPA Article 7 process that we undertake for each project or decision that comes before you.
Thank you.
This is John Hester. In terms of planning, there's really two things. The kind of plans we do, more generically, general plans or comprehensive plans, whatever, you plan for hazards and avoiding hazards. So you'll see, like, for example, in our plan, avalanche zones where we don't allow development. You'll see the WUI, the wildland urban interface, to protect from forest fires getting onto structures as easily as they could, et cetera. Earthquake setbacks are required from fault lines and building codes, et cetera. So there's all those kind of things that go into plans and codes. Evacuation planning is really in the bailiwick of first responders, emergency responders. I've had the opportunity to be in two regional emergencies where the Regional Emergency Operations Center was stood up. And typically what happens there is they're very dynamic. So if you had a dam break, say, I'm just picking this because this was one of the things we simulated our FEMA training in DC, in Emmitsburg, near DC, dam break on the Truckee River. That's something different than a forest fire coming down the side of a mountain. And so what the emergency responders do, usually the public safety people, sometimes public safety, by that I mean usually the law enforcement, as they look at each situation, they simulate those a lot beforehand, and then they figure out what to do. For example, in Caldor, we see the same picture of a lot of people stopped on Highway 50, evacuating. But what you'll notice if you look at that is there's two lanes that aren't being used. It's because they didn't think it was a big enough deal to open the contraflow, but that was the next step that could have happened. And those are the kind of things that the first responders plan, and they're very dynamic. It's not like something you can put into, on this street, you're going to go this way, no matter what. Depends on what the disaster is and where it is, and things like that. What we can do, and you all may remember, you had members of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team here, and we work with them, and work with the MAC, the Multi-Agency Coordinating Committee. What they asked us to plan for are things like communications into underserved areas, or thinning of the forest. And I know that's a controversial topic we've just heard about a couple times today, but thinning of the forest around evacuation routes. So those are the kind of things that kind of the area between what we do and what the first responders do. But, just hazard planning is something, we can do, like to protect from earthquake faults and landslide areas and so forth. Evacuation is something they do. And I would invite my colleagues from Placer County to add to that if they would like.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything more to add. I mean, the same is true for our planning, right? We do the same thing through general plans. We have our Office of Emergency Services prepares, long range plans, right? Looking at hazards, how to mitigate hazards. But the same is true for, if in the event of an emergency, it's completely different because it's so dynamic. So yeah, I think you summed it up well.
Well, I think to the public, the confusion is that we should somehow, that we're not thinking it's a serious issue. And I think everybody is aware this is a very serious issue. It's just, are these amendments doing something negative to that? Is that
Right, that,
right?
exactly. That's
And-
the assessment that we did as part of this package.
Right.
Right.
And you could argue, and I think you have, when we've talked about this, with new construction, with new sprinkler systems, with new hardening, with, I think it's Title 12, 24, the new building standards that require such, I mean, that's part of the driving cost of construction and why even affordable housing isn't affordable, because as we build new units, they have to comply with those standards that are very costly to build. So anyway, I'm sorry I've taken so much time, but I do want the public to know we do hear this issue and we are very concerned, but it's not necessarily on a project by project basis that we talk about that. And we can go back to bringing the emergency responders back in to help us on that. These amendments, again, I think are really minor. I haven't seen anyone or any issue raised that indicate that there's something here that is dramatically going to change. We are hoping to nudge development back into our town centers. I keep thinking it's more like we're nudging them because we don't have any significant project proposals at this point to this. And as I've said on the record before, we don't have housing, affordable housing developers knocking down our door. I mean, we don't have proposals coming in and permits being submitted. And so we're trying to do some things to see if we can get some more housing built at the small scale, which is what the community said. Look at duplexes, look at fourplexes, look in our neighborhoods, look at ADUs and other items. And so I felt really positive about all that. And I just had to, because earlier today we talked about chickens and eggs, if you were in there. Well, Shelley mentioned that what if somebody wanted to build an igloo? And I thought maybe she didn't drive around last winter to see that we had a whole lot of igloos in our community. Anyway, thanks, Shelley.
Thank you. I think you're right. We say it a lot, and I don't think it's clicked with the public yet, that we are in none of our plans are we proposing that we increase the amount of development in this lake. We are just trying to guide it towards our town centers where it actually poses the least risk for fire, and it creates the least VMT, and it creates the best economic benefit, and it helps us revitalize our community, and it helps us clean up the runoff into the lake from these old legacy projects. So every single thing is a win, and the public just thinks that we're advocating for so much more development. And these are very small changes. I mean, I'm actually disappointed in how small they are. That would be my contra argument to you. And I know you're going to have to look at what we just passed and figure out how Placer is going to implement the phase 2 housing goals, and you'll take a different approach than what we recommended. But we'll be looking forward to seeing that in the future. So any other comments before Shelley?
I think part of the problem is people are conflating what local jurisdictions do in terms of their development policy and how it may impact and it doesn't impact an increase in terms of increasing the number of full-time residents in the basin, because there are development caps. But then you have the influx of 15 million people into the basin during the summer season, right? And that's what they're looking at. They're looking at the congested streets. They're looking at, people snagged in long traffic jams. And that's what raises this issue to a greater level of concern. And the problem is, until we can find some way of, of regulating the inflow of folks into the basin at any one time, it's going to continue to be a concern that we really have no control over at the moment.
I just wanted to ask, that brought up something, the units that you're encouraging, the multifamily, they're affordable, achievable, and they're deed restricted, so they cannot be used as STRs. I imagine they're full-time resident only.
That is correct.
I just wanted to make that extra clear for our listening public. All right, so now I guess all we need is a motion. to
I
approve.
just wanted to,
Uh-huh.
sorry, do one comment and then direct you to the right page for the motion. But there is, Jacob and I have been working, I think, with Placer County a little bit on just clarifying when they say by right. What that is, that consistent with TRPA's language of, either it's an exempt activity or you need to come in for an application. So I just want to make a caveat, if you can include in your motion, that there may be some language changes just to address that issue to make certain that it's conforming to TRPA's compact and regional plan.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
So what you're asking for is some leeway to adjust that specific
Correct.
language in our
With-
motion
Yes.
before it goes to the governing board. So, anyone care to make the motion? Thank you, Shelley.
I move to recommend approval of required findings as described in attachment D, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the area plan amendment as described in the staff summary.
Great, thank you. Maria, do you want to call the roll?
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Mr. Settlemyre,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
All right, great, thank you. So that brings us to agenda item number. Oh,
We have a second motion.
oh,
I
okay,
further move
sorry.
to recommend adoption of ordinance 2024 amending ordinance 2021-02 to amend the Tahoe Basin Area Plan as shown in attachment C with the proviso, the conforming language may be added to make the language within the amendment compliant with TRPA code.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm trying to jump the gun, sorry. All right, Maria.
Mr. Settlemyre,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
Great. All right, now we can move on. All right, so that brings us to agenda item number 4, upcoming topics. As a reminder to the public, since this item is informational, only members of the public are welcome to comment at the final public comment item. So John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Hester. Next month, we tentatively have planned information item on the mixed use definition, some climate amendments and inclusionary when you subdivide. That's an information only. And then the following month, tentatively, we think we will have some amendments from the city of South Lake Tahoe and some amendments from Washoe County. Those dates are subject to change. And those are the upcoming things over the next couple months. Assuming the information hearings go well, we'll return for your recommendation on the mixed use, climate, so forth, and more to be determined.
Great, thank you. All right, any committee members have any questions on this topic? No. Okay, then we'll move on with the agenda since this was informational only. So we're on agenda item number 5, committee member comments. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments?
I apologize, I've spoken, but Mr. Chair, I know that our staff, and I'm sorry they just all left, but we are looking at how the Tahoe Basin area plan amendments that we just adopted and the housing amendments that the board did for TRPA, how those integrate, because we do have as local jurisdictions a period of time to opt in and opt out and make sure we're consistent. So I do know that our staff are considering, and John, you had some language that I was supposed to use that I've forgotten now because I've talked too much.
Well, I don't know if you were supposed to use it, but there is consideration of what you just recommended, not going to the board immediately, but waiting till the other amendment package catches up. So for the public's purpose, they can hear the whole thing at once in front of the governing board.
We've heard a lot from the public about the confusion between the two different packages and trying to see if we can better integrate those into one hearing process and have everybody's very clear on all of the decisions. So that is a possibility. And so stay tuned. And I want to make sure the public's aware. We don't plan to necessarily bring this forward next month to the governing board at this point.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Anyone else have any comments? Seeing none, we will go on to our final matter of business, which is general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the Regional Planning Committee on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. The Regional Planning Committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public during this public comment period. If any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand either now in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Anyone, and there is no one in the room. That's a good sign for that. Anyone online that wishes to comment?
Mr. Chair, we have one hand raised so far. Doug Flaherty, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, committee members. And I'm going to comment on an item on the agenda that we just spoke of, and to keep me from doing so is violating my First Amendment rights and violating the Nevada open meeting law. I have broad discretion to make these comments. So having said that, I just want to get it on the record before this meeting is over that you guys just voted. It's extremely amazing to me. The Placer County supervisor tells you, boldface, I don't like to use the word lie. I like to have more respect than that, but falsely tells you that we're not increasing density with these amendments. There's at least 4, maybe 6 areas in the Placer County staff reports that say, yes, they're increasing density, yet she tells you they were not. And she gets away with it, right? Completely misleads the group. So anyway, as far as all this stuff on wildfire evacuation and, the smoke screen, so to speak, this isn't about housing amendments. This is about roadway capacity and increasing density in town centers that are going to cause choke points. And if you had read the information that I put forward in my report, I know there's a lot there from my comments. Just reading attachment A, there's no way you could have voted for this. So not sure you're reading that stuff. But as far as, the claims that are being made by the various conservation groups versus, your spin and your opinion, which is jeopardizing public safety, I guess we're going to find out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. Anyone else, Catherine?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment.
All right, great. Then we will end that public comment period. And is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? All right, thank you, Mr. Settlemeyer. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.